Hi, my name is Keith Cooper, Northern Light Images, and in this video I'm just continuing some testing of the GFX100S here, 100 megapixel medium format camera. I should say small medium format, not full-size medium format for those of you used to using larger film. Still appreciably larger than the standard 35mm sensor, which means that with a larger sensor some lenses may not work on it. Why is that? Well, normally lenses are designed so that the image circle, which is the image they project behind the lens of your subject onto where the sensor is normally large enough to cover the sensor and not necessarily that much larger. It's why you can't use some APS-C lenses on full frame cameras, because the image circle is designed for the smaller sensor. It's a general thing. However, many lens designs actually have quite large image circles, and I've been using, now I've got some Fuji lenses to test with as well, but I'm interested in using some of my older specialized lenses. Now, I've looked at using Canon's TS-E94 and TS-E17 lenses, 17mm, 24mm tilt shift lenses, and in fact have used them for professional work already, where as long as you're careful in using them, they are perfectly good for use with the sensor here that you get with the GFX, the 100 megapixel sensor. I mean, the camera I was using before was a 50 megapixel sensor, so even if I use them and crop to 35mm mode, which you don't have to do, but I might do for compositional reasons, I've still got effectively 60 odd megapixels. Now, I'd rather make use of the whole size sensor, so how do these lenses stack up against it? Well, as I said, the 17mm and the 24mm, they work great. I'm happy to use them, take them on a job. What about an even older lens? This is the TS-E90, the original f2.8L 90mm tilt shift lens. This dates from 1992. Well, this actual one is probably only about 15-20 years old, but yeah, the lens design goes back a lot further. I get people say, how can you even think of using such ancient lenses on a camera like this? You're wasting your money, you're not getting the best out of the camera. Well, that belies perhaps more their view of what you need to get acceptable results. My criteria are the results good enough for what I want to do with the images? And much of what I've looked at here says yes. And the old adage that a rising tide floats all boats. Well, at least boats that don't have holes in them. So when the tide comes in, the idea is that big boats, little boats, no matter how good the boats, they all rise together. Well, that's true to some extent with lenses, because better sampling allows you to sharpen up lenses more effectively. There are all kinds of post-processing tricks. You can get better results from old lenses. But really, I'm looking, are these lenses good enough? And when I say good enough, there are two respects. Do they have the image circle coverage so that you don't get pronounced vignetting, for example? And are they just sharp enough? Have they got enough contrast for any serious use? Now, the picture I've got here is down the canal, down the river here in Leicester, converted mill buildings, and that's taken with the 90mm with a bit of vertical shift, or rise as it's called sometimes. Now that's simple to do on this, you just turn this and it lifts up. So that's how I would typically use a lens like this in sort of architectural use, and also sometimes for product photography, which I do use this lens for as well. Works very well with extension tubes. If you try and add tilt to it, you can see the lens is not so good. It's still a very good lens, but yeah, if you tilt the lens much, it shows. Certainly compared to Canon's TS-E90 2.8L macro lens, which is the new version. It's not just an updated version of this. The Canon new 90 along with the 135 and the TS-E50 lenses are whole new lenses. They are vastly better. They work very well, but they're also very expensive. This one works well for what I use it for and have used it for ages, so I still use it. So here we've got this image here, and that's with a bit of vertical rise. Now the photo here, it's sharp, it shows all the detail I want. I can zoom right into it and I've got plenty of detail in it. Certainly suggests I'm going to get no problem with using this lens. Now, if I go, this is a view taken from De Montfort University, from where I'd gone up onto a roof garden, looking out over Leicester, and I wanted to see just how good the detail was. Well, it's good enough so that this building in the distance, I can zoom in on that, and there's distortion from air movement. It was a warmish day. There is no problems with it. There's no shift or anything on this lens. This is just straight. This is straight for it. There's brick buildings down in the corner. There's clear detail of individual bricks and the mortar between them. There is detail in the trees. There's detail all over the picture. It is sharp. I have no problems with that whatsoever. Now, if I put the latest TS-E90 on this, would I see a slight improvement? I suspect I might, because it's a much newer lens. It has better coatings. It's more resistant, certainly, to flare and things like that. But would I notice that much difference on an image this size? No. If the problem with detail in the far distance here is because of air movement, and this is handheld using the image stabilization in this, albeit leaning on a railing, but that is every bit as sharp as I could possibly need, and I've got lots of details so I can crop. One of the reasons I got the this particular body, lots of them, and I've done some videos looking at it, but certainly one of the reasons is it means that the images I supply can be cropped much more freely by clients without losing resolution. Why is that important? Because we supply a mix of images. When I do my architectural photography, I supply a mix of images, some of them with larger than needed coverage, and people may decide to take a crop out of this and just make a very narrow panoramic, for example, out of it. I've had this happen, and the 50 megapixels that I had on the Canon 5DS, yep, that was okay, but in talking to several clients who'd done this, they said, yeah, would we like more megapixels? Yeah, that would make it easier for us to work on. So, once again, more megapixels helps. You don't necessarily need it for everything, but when you need it, it makes a difference. I noticed the same thing when I went from a Canon 1DS Mark III, which was 21 megapixels, up to the 5DS, which was 50 megapixels. The improvements in the files and the ease of working on them was such that it was quite a jump. The resolutions, not necessarily that much, but the flexibility of the files is what counts. And if I add to this the fact that I've got more dynamic range and the files are easier to edit to get shadow recovery and other details that I might want in the images, yeah, I'm getting more out of the images here. So that's with the 90. There's just look, the compression that you get from a longer lens. This is 90mm. It's equivalent in field of view to about a 75-80mm on full frame 35mm size sensor. So it's a medium telephoto. It's a little bit more medium on this than it is on a crop sensor. Gives a nice image. Once again, no lack of detail in the image or contrast. I'm not seeing any. This lens is just on the basis of these two photos. This lens goes into the camera bag for when I need it. Very useful. Now, here's the view, building looking down. Now the sun's just round here, so the contrast is relatively low on this. Always a problem with it. But once again, the files from this, I can bring up the shadows and do stuff much more. This hasn't been processed very much, but this is vertical shift. So you see the horizon is right down the bottom here, so I've got pretty much full vertical shift. And the key thing to notice is that there is no vignetting in this top corner here. So I'm not even, with this lens, on full shift, I'm not even hitting the edge of the image circle in a very pronounced way, which says that I can use this lens freely. I don't need to consider cropping or anything like that. Certainly with the 24, I may a bit need to consider strong shift on it, and the 17mm TS-E90 I do need to consider where the edge and whether I've got any undue vignetting. Now you do get vignetting. Now that's the view of in the previous shot, but without shift. And if I just go back, you can see how much shift I'm getting from this, quite a lot. And this is with a 90mm lens, or about 75-80mm equivalent. So that's pretty useful for that. Is a shot just taken of the sky. Now, this was fully shifted vertically. And there is, as I said before, no vignetting whatsoever at the top here. So I'm pushing up towards the edge of this image circle and there's no vignetting. However, there is, and this was, if I remember rightly, at f8, there is a very slight bit of vignetting at the bottom. Now, since I'm moving up on the image circle, the bottom ought to be fairly central in the sensor. In fact, the middle of the sensor is about here, would be equivalent. So why am I getting vignetting there? It's because of internal vignetting caused by the lens mount itself, the Canon EF lens mount. The lens mount is slightly smaller, and when I do the shift like this, I'm just catching part of it, and it's causing a bit of vignetting there. Easily dealt with, but once again, something just worth knowing about when you're using. This is at full shift as well, which you don't tend to use that often. In terms of sharpness, general illumination, no problems whatsoever with using the lens. So as I said before, I'm happy to add this one to it. Works really well for that, no difficulties. In terms of aberrations of the lens, yeah, it's an older lens, and guess what? There's some chromatic aberration. A few pixels worth of chromatic aberration, but fortunately, even in using basic processing, using Adobe Camera Raw, using the automatic correction, which does work for shifted images, it goes completely. If I look very carefully, I can see perhaps a little bit on some highlights, high contrast edges. I can see a tiny little bit of purple fringing as well, but that's also dealt with very easily in settings of, I just add a pixel or two of fringing removal in the purple, and it cleans up any residual image. But most of what you see is the chromatic aberration, which is there for that, and then that's fixed, an automatic fix for it. So I don't need to do any more for that whatsoever. One thing I've noticed is that if you're using an adapter, and this is a photodiox adapter, the parameters of the EXIF data from the lens is incorporated in the image file when it's saved. So this one actually tells me that I was using, when I look in, this is using Adobe Bridge just to look at the pictures, I can see that I was using, and it has the lens name. Now in the EXIF data, it's got the lens serial number, all the usual stuff that you'd get in it. So that you can actually, you're not stuck with having no identification of the lens because you're using an adapter. It tells you what it is, and it even tells you the equivalent focal length. And I was wrong when I said 75-80. It's listed here as 71mm equivalent. So yeah, even more medium, less telephoto than not. But anyway, that's straightforward using that. Now, what about if I wanted to use tilt? Now, tilt is difficult to show in an obvious way unless you're using it for an effect here. Now here I've tilted the lens strongly to the left and then used, this is at f2.8, so it actually shows up on this. I've tilted it to the left and I've adjusted the focus setting so that the focal plane runs roughly along the path, edge of the path next to me here. You can see there is a slight bit of darkening over one side, and also the softness you get when you do this extreme tilt like this is not the same on either side. I've got quite a bit of coverage of looking at lens tilt, how it works. I've got some videos, but I've got lots of articles and my book on how to use tilt shift lenses, which covers all the details of this sort of stuff. But anyway, that is the image plane running alongside me. There's another one. This is similar to one I've used before. I'm now looking here. I've got the image. I've tilted the lens to the right, adjusted the focus, and I've now got the focal plane running along the edge of the water here, and it's just caught. I've just waited for people walking across, and I've just got the picture here as this guy's walking across the bridge. Once again, the blur on this side is different subtly to the blur on this side. If I was to be using the new TS-E90 lens, this in focus area would be sharper, and I know that from testing. I've got a review of the new TS-E90 as well, but I know that with strong tilt like this it would be much sharper. But you tend to be doing shots like this, if you're doing them at all, for effect. You're trying to show. Now if I stop down from 2.8 down to f4, well, there'll be slightly more resolution. If I go to f4 on this, the guy here will be much sharper. If I go to f5.6, the band of sharpness will be thicker here, so that the depth of field, in this case, thickness of the vertical plane, will be more, and that'll show up. But I've done it at 2.8 here, so it's even remotely visible here on the video, so you can see what it is, so you can get an idea of what's going on. If you don't want the effect quite as pronounced as this, stop down a bit. That's more like you would use tilt for maximizing apparent depth of field. You use it at wide open like this when you want to show the effects. So for example, this one here, the old miniature world effect. On this one, I'm looking where the plane of focus is, and I've got it running roughly horizontal. Here, I've tilted the lens upwards, which gives a plane of focus going over my head. I've then adjusted the focus setting and run the plane of focus along here. So there's a boat, that's the building that was in the first picture I showed there. So that's using tilt there. Tilt on the diagonal, so here the lens is tilted upwards in that direction, which gives a plane of focus running in that direction, and we've got the plane of focus running through here, catching the people on the bank, feeding the swans, and some of the other swans in the direction. Shots like this, you're looking at it and just saying, well, what works? Now, if I'm using the GFX like I am here, I've got the advantage of, I've got focus peaking, which is much easier to see than it is on the viewfinder of a DSLR. This sort of stuff is much easier to do on a mirrorless camera. I've tried it obviously on this, I've tried it on the EOS RP that I'm using, and in fact I've got coming next week a 50mm tilt lens, just tilt, to have a look at. I'm not sure what I'm going to use it for, but anyway, it's turning up sometime next week for me to have a look at, so I'm curious to see what I get for that. But there we go, strong tilt using with that. Now, that was not taken with this. That particular picture was taken with this old clunker. This is a Russian or Soviet 58mm f2 Helios lens. It's a screw fit. It's an M42 screw fit lens. So screw fit lens there. I've got a screw fit adapter to EF that goes here where I've got it on this. Of course, there's no electronics in this, so how does the camera know what it is? Well, you go into the settings here, the mount adapter settings, and I set up a preset of 58mm. That tells the image stabilizing system how to work out how to do its image stabilizing. The stabilizing system needs to know, to get a hint of what to do, it needs to know the focal length of the lens attached. And in this instance, it's 58mm. Now this lens, I've looked at this before on various cameras and that. It's a sort of lens that people like playing around with. I say it's f2, and it gives a particular out of focus look to it. Some people like the sort of swirly bokeh that you get with it, the out of focus now. Now this is taken at f2. In this, part of the lamp here, the texture on the fabric, you can just about see. You're losing a lot of sharpness here. This in no way is up to, at f2, resolving what this camera can manage. But that doesn't matter if this is the sort of picture you want. Who cares whether it resolves it? You can always reduce the size of your pictures. You can't increase them. So that's just using f2. You can see, the out of focus areas are quite interesting. I say it's a classic lens, this one. This particular one, I believe, must be at least 40 years, perhaps 50 years old. It's an old lens, that one. I've got boxes of old kit like this. People used to just, when stuff like this was absolutely worthless, people used to say, "Oh, I've found some old camera kit, Keith. Do you want it?" Yes is always the answer. In fact, several of these drawers in here are full of old kit that I've been given over the years, which, stuff I test. But that works very nicely. I don't really see me using it, but it's great. Just because it doesn't match 100 megapixels, I simply don't care. Now, different lens altogether. This, in fact, is the lens that's sitting on the table there in the previous picture, is this one, another screw fit lens. Now this is a Zeiss, Carl Zeiss Jena, so it's one of the East German Zeiss lenses, and this one, fairly simple light lens design, does have coatings on it. It's 135mm f3.5. Now, screw fit again. It's just a, this is a bit more of a telephoto lens on here. This one, if I remember rightly, the thing lists this one as 135, and then the alternate version of it, it says 107. So this is equivalent to about a 110mm lens on 35mm. Once again, it's a screw fit lens, so it's just a simple adapter I've got on here to EF, screw fit to EF adapter, and then I'll just pop it on here. No EXIF, so I need to set the details in the camera for it. And, well, that works fine. I've zoomed right in on this, and there is fine detail all the way in. This is at f8. At f8, I'm sure someone's going to tell me I'm starting to get a bit of diffraction, killing off some of the, but I don't care. I'm after a bit of depth of field, because remember, with longer lenses, your depth of field is always limited. You're going to notice it on something like this. Now, I've heard some people say, medium format, reduced depth of field. Well, no, the depth of field on this is with, let's say this 24mm lens here. The depth of field is the same on this as it is on this, which is my old 100D. So it's an APS-C sensor. It's just the field of view is much smaller. For the same field of view, you would end up using different focal lengths, so therefore the settings are going to be different. A 24mm lens is a 24mm lens, whatever you put it on. Now, I can't remember what this one, that's a 150mm lens on that. 150mm lens on this 5x4 camera is a 150mm lens. It would be, if I put that lens with an adapter, it would be a 150mm lens on this, it would be a 150mm lens on this. Makes no difference. However, I get the depth of field associated with a 150mm lens, which is, on standards here, a relatively longish lens. Of course, it's relatively wide angle here compared to either of these. Very different view from APS-C, medium format, up to 5x4. Very different view, but the depth of field is the same on each. Now, the sensor, the pixel density, things like that, they all make a difference and things. But the thing to remember, and I've had several people ask me about this, about when adapting lenses, is that 50mm is 50mm is 50mm. Whatever you put it on, it's 50mm, the focal length. It's the field of view, how much of it, and in particular whether the lens is capable of projecting a large enough image circle. So this lens here would work fine on this. It works fine on this. You put it on this, and all you're going to get is like a circle at that. You can't expect a lens like this to have the coverage you'd need for a camera like that. So, that's something I've been asked about quite a few times, and it's obviously something that people get, if not confused about, not clear about. But anyway, great picture of that, just looking down the street. Just enough compression to give a look. This is with the camera tilted up a little bit. Obviously there's no shift on this, so I'm going to get a bit of, I'm going to get a little bit of convergence of verticals like that if I'm not pointing the camera vertically, but it works fine. Back in the conservatory again, this is f3.5. There is, with this, there's a little bit of chromatic aberration. Fixable, just as it is with this, very easy to fix. That's at f3.5. The depth of field's quite shallow, so that you can see the door in the background is out of focus here, and certainly this cactus that's in front of this one here is distinctly soft. But that's 3.5. There's no significant vignetting on it at all. That's with this lens fully wide open, and I'm not seeing much vignetting. Take it to f8, and I've got plenty of detail. It's a bit sharper. We're out of focus in the back here. This is not pin sharp, but all of this is perfectly sharp. No problems at all with it. And in fact, looking at that, there's a label in that cactus there. And if I have a crop, you can easily read the text on the label. No problem with that whatsoever. And that's the size of it. Am I getting my full 100 megapixels out of this? This has taken an f8. Probably not, but once again, you're not going to be surprised to hear I don't really care. If I need really, really sharp stuff and really want to make use of all that resolution, then yes, I will get some other lenses. However, I don't actually have the money to get other lenses spare for it. I've got to justify them. Now, I'm happy with this, and I'm happy how it's going. Now, I'm going to be testing later on in the year the Fuji 30mm tilt shift lens, which I'll be looking at that in, and I'm expecting that to be very good. Other lenses I'm looking at, I just got, this is a G-mount lens. This is Fuji, it's a Fuji G-mount lens. It's a Laowa 17mm wide angle lens. Now 17, what's that equivalent to? 14, 13 equivalent on full frame. So that one I'm going to be having a look at. I've looked at similar lens before on full frame, but this one is the medium format one there, so I'm going to be having a look at that. And in terms of adapted lenses, this is my 8-15 fisheye lens. How does a fisheye differ between full frame, this is made for, and on this? Well, the fisheye lens has a very sharp circular image, an image circle, and that the size of that is changed by the focal length in this design, so that it will go up to, and I've tested this on this, at the longest focal length of this, there's a slight bit of cut off in the corners. Very little. So I'm hoping, since I know this is a really nice sharp lens, it's a Canon L lens, 8-15 f4L. This, in initial tests, works very well on this. I'll do some stuff which I'll specifically look at fisheye lenses and correction of them. I've got quite a lot of written articles in the past about fisheye lenses and how to process the images, different things you can do with them. But try that on this, so plenty of things to keep me busy. I hope this has been of some interest. Please do ask questions. Yeah, any suggestions for other things to test, to look at? If I can, I'll have a go. But thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Oh, and please do subscribe to the channel. Thank you.